What would you do if the woman you let go years ago showed up with twins? And one of them had your exact eyes. Jack Callahan stood in the private jet's bathroom, straightening the knot of his navy blue silk tie. The mirror reflected a man who had it all, or so it seemed. At 46, he was one of New York's most powerful real estate tycoons, with skyscrapers bearing his name. His salt and pepper hair was immaculately styled, his custom suit hugged his athletic build, and his Rolex glinted under the lights. But behind the crisp image was a man trying to hide the hollowness in his chest. Today was supposed to be the pinnacle of his career, a $5 billion development deal that would reshape downtown Manhattan. Months of negotiation, legal maneuvering, and strategy meetings were about to pay off. Jack couldn't afford distractions. Still, as he splashed cold water on his face and looked at himself again, an old ache surfaced, the kind that money couldn't numb. Ava. It had been 5 years since she'd left, vanishing from his life with nothing but a handwritten note that said, "I need to find who I am, and I can't do it here." No goodbye. No explanation. No closure. "Sir, we'll be landing at JFK in 20, came the voice of Sarah, his sharp assistant, from beyond the door. Jack nodded to himself, took a deep breath, and walked back to his leather seat. But fate had other plans. JFK Airport buzzed with the usual chaos, suitcases rolling, boarding calls echoing, and travelers hurrying past each other with eyes fixed on their phones. Jack, flanked by Sarah and 2 security men, moved swiftly through the private terminal, headed toward the car waiting outside. "Mr. Whitmore has made a counteroffer," Sarah said, holding up her tablet. "It's aggressive. The board is on edge." Jack barely registered her words, because through the floor-to-ceiling glass wall of the terminal, he saw her. Ava Carter. She stood on the far side of the glass with the sun catching in her honey-brown skin. Her once long braids were now styled into elegant twists, and her soft yellow sundress fluttered slightly in the breeze. She looked even more radiant than he remembered. But it wasn't just her presence that stole his breath. Standing on either side of her, holding her hands, were 2 boys, no older than 4. Maybe 5, twins, with light brown skin and eyes so familiar they made Jack's knees weaken. Those Aisha's eyes stared up at the airplanes with wide-eyed wonder, just as he had done at that age. The world seemed to slow. Jack stopped walking. The crowd kept moving around him, but he was frozen, staring at a truth too big to process. Ava had been pregnant when she left, and he never knew. "Sir, we need to go." Sarah tugged at his sleeve, urgency in her voice, but Jack didn't move. Through the glass, he saw Ava crouch to tie one boy's shoelace while the other bounced and pointed at a plane. His gestures, his laugh, even the way he scrunched his nose, it was like watching a mirror of Jack's childhood. He whispered, barely audible, "Cancel the meeting." Sarah blinked. "What?" "Cancel everything." "But sir, this is your legacy on the line." Jack turned slowly to look at her, eyes burning. "My legacy is out there." Holding her hand. Without waiting for a response, he stepped toward the main terminal entrance. As he entered the public concourse, Ava turned, sensing something. Their eyes met. Shock. Recognition. Fear. She quickly gathered the boy's hands, whispering something as she tried to hurry away. "Ava!" Jack called out. She froze. The boys looked up at her, confused. Slowly, she turned. "Hello, Jack," she said, voice soft but steady. His heart raced. "Were you ever going to tell me?" Tears welled in her eyes. "I wanted to. So many times." One of the boys tugged her dress. "Mommy, who's that man?" The words shattered Jack. That man. His own child didn't know him. He swallowed hard. "We need to talk," he said, voice low and firm. Ava glanced around, searching for an escape, but she knew this conversation was 5 years overdue. "Boys," she said gently, "how about we go get some ice cream? The twins lit up. Jack followed behind them, numb and silent. At the airport cafe, they sat two boys chattering about sprinkles and chocolate chips, completely unaware that they were sitting next to the father they'd never known. Jack leaned toward Ava, barely able to speak.
Their names, she hesitated, Ethan and Elijah, but they go by Ethan and Eli. Elijah Callahan, named after him, and he didn't even know. Jack looked at the boys, memorizing every detail.
The same cheekbones, the same way Eli furrowed his brow in thought, the same dimple Ethan had when he smiled.
Why? It was all he could ask. Ava's voice trembled. Because your world suffocated me.
And when I found out I was pregnant with twins, I panicked. I thought I was protecting them. I didn't want them raised in a world that would question their worth every day. Jack gritted his teeth.
So you disappeared? I was going to tell you, but the pregnancy was complicated. Bed rest.
Then I stayed with my sister in Atlanta. The longer I waited, the harder it got. Jack looked at the boys again, laughing now as they shared a cookie. He had missed everything. First steps, first words, bedtime stories. I want to be part of their lives, he said, starting today. Ava looked at him, stunned. I won't let them grow up, not knowing their father. Eli looked up just then. Mommy, can that man come with us to the zoo tomorrow? Ava hesitated. Jack looked at her, eyes pleading not just for permission, but for redemption. She nodded slowly. Okay. Jack exhaled, and for the first time in 5 years he felt like he could breathe again. Not as Jack Callahan, billionaire, but as Dad. The morning after the airport encounter, Jack Callahan sat alone in his Manhattan penthouse, staring at a photo he'd secretly taken of the twins. Ethan and Eli covered in ice cream and joy, completely unaware of how they'd shifted the axis of his world. His phone buzzed again. Another email from the board, another message from Sarah. Another demand from investors. He didn't care. The skyline view behind him, so often a symbol of his dominance, felt meaningless now. Buildings with his name etched in steel suddenly paled in comparison to the names that had never been on his lips until yesterday. Ethan. Eli. His sons. He hadn't slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he imagined all the moments he'd missed. First words, first teeth, first scraped knees. He'd been in boardrooms while they were learning how to walk. He'd been shaking hands with billionaires while they were learning how to say daddy. And now, he wasn't even sure they knew who he was. Sarah burst through the office doors, tablet in hand. Jack, we have a problem. Whitmore just announced a press conference. He's trying to convince the board you've gone unstable. He says you missed the JFK meeting intentionally to sabotage the deal. Jack looked up, still holding the photo of the boys. Let him. Sarah blinked. Excuse me? I said let him talk. I'm not fighting him, not right now. She frowned. You're walking away from this? Jack, you've spent 15 years building this empire. I know, he said quietly. Sarah stepped closer, voice softer now. This isn't like you. Jack looked out the window, voice steady but low. It is like me. It's just a version of me no one's ever seen. He turned back to her. I'm not walking away from the company, Sarah. I'm stepping towards something more important. That afternoon, Jack stood outside a brownstone in Brooklyn Modeste, colorful, alive. Ava's place. It wasn't guarded by doormen or encased in marble, but it had potted plants in the windows and sidewalk chalk on the front steps. It was a home. He knocked gently. After a pause, Ava opened the door, looking tired but beautiful, dressed in jeans and a faded college t-shirt. Her eyes widened when she saw him. You came. I told you I would, Jack said. Inside, the walls were covered with art, most of it clearly created by small, enthusiastic hands. There were crayon drawings taped to the fridge, finger paintings hung like masterpieces, and 2 little backpacks by the door. He stared at them, absorbing the life he'd missed. "The boys are napping," Ava said softly. "We went to the playground this morning. Eli insisted on being a dinosaur for 2 hours." Jack smiled faintly. "Sounds like me at that age." She smiled back, a little guarded.
They sat at the kitchen table, a pot of coffee between them. "I didn't expect you to show up," she said, "especially not with everything going on." "This deal, your company." "I cancelled the next 2 weeks," Jack interrupted. "Everything can wait." Ava raised an eyebrow. Jack Callahan postponed a $5 billion project for ice cream and dinosaurs? He didn't laugh.
He just looked at her. "For my sons, I'd postpone the world." Her face softened.
"You really mean that?" "I do." He hesitated, then asked the question that had haunted him all night. Do they know anything about me?" Ava looked down at her coffee. "Bits and pieces. I told them their dad was a successful businessman, that he lived in the big city. I showed them pictures." Jack's jaw tightened. "So I've been a ghost in a photo album." "I didn't want to confuse them," she said defensively. "I didn't want to lie, but I didn't want to bring pain into their lives either." "Pain?" Jack repeated. "You think I would have hurt them?" "No," she whispered. "I was scared, not of you, but of your world, the pressure. The expectations, the headlines." She looked up. "And your mother." Silence filled the room like smoke. "I heard her," Ava continued, "at that charity gala, the night I found out I was pregnant. She told someone she was relieved I wasn't pregnant yet. That the family wasn't ready for that kind of legacy." Jack's face turned cold. "She said that?" Ava nodded. "And I knew. I couldn't raise my children in a place where their existence was considered a liability." Jack leaned back in his chair, eyes burning. "I should have known. You were working 18-hour days. You were expanding across Asia. I didn't want to be your burden, Jack. I wanted to be your partner. And when I realized I couldn't be both, I left." Jack stood slowly, walking to the window. "I thought you left because you stopped loving me." Ava's voice broke behind him. "I left because I loved you too much to make you choose." A small voice called from the hallway. "Mommy?" Ethan peeked around the corner, rubbing his eyes, his curly hair tousled from sleep. He blinked when he saw Jack. "Hi," he said. Jack's heart clenched. "Hi, buddy. Are you the man from the airport?" "I am." Eli emerged next, dragging a stuffed tiger. He looked at Jack with a furrowed brow, the same expression Jack made when deep in thought. "Are you coming to the zoo with us tomorrow?" Jack turned to Ava. "If you'll have me," he said gently. She hesitated, then nodded. "We'd like that." Ethan ran into the room. "Do you like animals?" Jack smiled for real this time. "I love them." The boys began chattering about lions and penguins and something called the Poop Zoo song, which Jack pretended to understand. Ava stood quietly, watching the scene. He didn't belong to her world anymore. But maybe, just maybe, he was finding his way back to theirs. Jack Callahan had closed 1,000 deals in his life. He'd stood before cutthroat investors, survived Wall Street collapses, and negotiated against foreign billionaires. But nothing had prepared him for the chaos of helping twin 4-year-olds get dressed for preschool. "Eli, your shoes go on your feet, not on your hands," Jack said, crouched on the living room rug of Ava's Brooklyn brownstone. "Ethan, that's not toothpaste, buddy. That's Ava's face cream. It smells like strawberries," Ethan declared proudly, white foam streaked across his cheek. Ava leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, trying not to laugh. "Still think the boardroom is tougher?" Jack shot her a mock glare, then grinned. "I take it back. Wall Street has nothing on breakfast with these two." It had been 3 days since the airport. 3 days of school drop-offs, playground chases, bedtime stories, and whispered questions like, "Do you like peanut butter, Daddy?"
3 days of Jack learning what it meant to be dad, one spilled cup of orange juice at a time. And he was loving every second of it. Mostly. Because today Margaret Callahan was coming. Margaret Callahan had never taken well to surprises, or to Ava Carter. She arrived precisely at 10 a.m., chauffeured in a black town car with tinted windows and an assistant trailing behind her with an umbrella despite the clear sky.
Jack met her at the front door of the brownstone. "Mother," he said with a tight smile. "Jack," she said, stepping inside with the kind of grace only old money could produce.
"You didn't mention this was in Brooklyn?" She glanced around the warm, modest living room like it was a third-world embassy. Her gaze stopped on a crayon drawing taped to the wall. A stick figure with wild hair labeled "Me plus Daddy plus T-Rex." She blinked. "Charming." Jack took a slow breath. "They're good kids." "I'm sure they are," Margaret replied, brushing invisible dust from her Chanel coat. "And I'm here with an open mind." He almost laughed. An open mind from Margaret Callahan. That'd be the day. Ava walked in from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. "Good morning, Margaret." Margaret turned, smile practiced. "Ava, you look... well, you look expensive," Ava replied with a straight face. Jack coughed, pretending not to smile. Just then, the pitter-patter of feet echoed through the hall, and the twins came tumbling in. "Daddy, Daddy, I found my—" Ethan stopped short when he saw Margaret. "Who's she?" Jack knelt beside him. "This is... your grandmother." Elijah's eyes widened. "Like... Mommy's mummy?" Margaret stiffened. "No," Jack said gently. "My mother." The twins looked her over curiously. Ethan walked forward. "Do you like dinosaurs?" Margaret blinked.
"I suppose." "Good," Ethan nodded. "You can play the volcano." "The volcano?" Jack chuckled. "You just have to sit and pretend to erupt." Margaret declined politely.
Later that day, Jack and Margaret sat at a small table on Ava's porch while the boys played in the yard with Ava. "She's still as defiant as ever," Margaret said, sipping from a glass of water like it was Chardonnay. "She's raising your grandchildren." Margaret didn't respond. "I've done the test," Jack said quietly. "I've submitted the DNA results, just to satisfy everyone's questions." "You shouldn't need a test," Margaret replied. "They have your eyes." He studied her for a moment. "Then why do you still look disappointed?" She turned to face him, her posture still queenly. "Because this is not the life I envisioned for you, Jack. You were building a dynasty. Now you're playing soccer in a backyard with children who don't even know your name." "They know me now," Jack said firmly. "And Ava," she challenged. "Are you planning to bring her back into your life as well?" Jack looked at Ava through the window barefoot, laughing, chasing their sons through bubbles. "I never stopped wanting her in it." Margaret's jaw tightened. She ran. "With your children." She was scared, and maybe she had every reason to be. Margaret's gaze flickered. "You said things, Mother." "Hurtful things. You judged her before you knew her." "I was protecting you." "No," Jack said. "You were protecting our name. And in doing so, you made sure the people I loved most didn't feel welcome in it." A long silence followed. Then Margaret stood. "I won't apologize for trying to maintain standards, Jack. This family..." Jack stood too. "This family now includes 2 little boys named Ethan and Elijah. They matter more than any standard you're clinging to." Before she could respond, the front door opened and Ethan ran outside, holding a lopsided paper crown. "Grandma," he called out, "do you want to see my kingdom?" Margaret blinked. "Your kingdom?" He grabbed her hand. "It's under the tree, but the dragon's sleeping, so we have to tiptoe." Jack watched as his mother was pulled into the yard by a 4-year-old in a paper crown, tiptoeing past the sandbox, and for the first time she didn't resist. That night, After the boys had fallen asleep in a fort of pillows and bedtime books, Jack and Ava sat on the front steps with mugs of tea. "How did she take it?" Ava asked softly. "Not great. But she didn't spontaneously combust, so—" "Progress," Ava chuckled. "That's encouraging." He looked at her. "They're amazing," he said. "Ethan and Eli, you've done an incredible job. Thank you. I hate that I wasn't there. You're here now." Jack took a deep breath. "I want more than just visits, Ava. I want to be part of this, of them, every day." She didn't speak right away. Then she said, "We're not the same people we were 5 years ago, Jack." "No," he said, "but maybe we're better." He reached for her hand, and this time she didn't pull away. Inside the house, 2 small boys dreamed of volcanoes and paper crowns. And outside, their father took his first real step into the kingdom that truly mattered. The headlines hit the next morning like a punch to the gut. Jack Callahan missing in action, $5 billion deal at risk. Family drama erupts as CEO's secret sons surface. Charles Whitmore steps in to save the deal. Jack stared at the screen in silence, a cup of black coffee cooling in his hands. Ava sat beside him, her face pale as she scrolled through social media reactions. People were speculating everything from corporate sabotage to scandalous paternity cover-ups. "They found out fast," she whispered. "Whitmore has always had friends in the press," Jack muttered, "and now he's using my sons to make me look weak." A knock came at the door. It was Sarah, Jack's loyal assistant, with a laptop and 2 cell phones buzzing non-stop. "Charles just called an emergency board meeting," she said. "He's requesting a vote to remove you as CEO." Ava stiffened. "Can he do that?" "He's trying," Jack replied grimly. "And he's going to use the kids to do it." Sarah hesitated. "He also hired a private investigator." Jack's stomach dropped. "To do what?" "To question the timeline," Sarah said. "To suggest that Ava manipulated you emotionally before a billion-dollar decision, that you're compromised." Ava's eyes widened in disbelief. "He's turning this into a custody war." Jack stood up. "No, he's turning it into a power grab, and he's not going to win." At Reynolds Enterprises headquarters, Jack walked into the boardroom like a man walking into battle. The air was heavy with tension, suits shuffled, eyes watched. Charles Whitmore stood at the head of the table, smile tight. "Jack," he said, all faux politeness, "glad you could make time between soccer practice and bedtime stories." Jack ignored him. "I know what this looks like," Jack began, addressing the board, "but I haven't lost control. I've found my purpose." Laughter rippled. Jack let it fade. "My sons aren't a scandal, they're a blessing. And I refuse to let their existence be weaponized for profit." Charles cut in smoothly. "With all due respect, Jack, this isn't about blessings. This is about shareholder trust. About stability. You missed $1 billion negotiation." "I was meeting my children for the first time," Jack snapped. "Therefore, I didn't even know they existed until 5 days ago." The room shifted. Jack took a breath. "I submitted to a DNA test. The results are conclusive. They are my sons. And if being their father disqualifies me in your eyes, so be it. I won't apologize for choosing them." Silence. Then one board member raised a hand. "And what about the project?" "The investors? They're still on board," Jack said. "I've spoken to Mr. Chen personally. In fact, he said he respects a man who chooses family over optics." Whitmore's face twitched. Jack continued. "Let me be clear. I will not step down. I will not back away. And I will not allow Charles Whitmore or anyone else to use my children as leverage." He turned toward the door. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a zoo trip to catch." And with that, Jack walked out, head high, heart pounding. He had no idea what tomorrow held, but for today, he'd chosen his sons. And that was the only vote that mattered. Part 5. Malibu and New Beginnings. The ocean air was different in Malibu. It smelled like salt and hope. Jack stood barefoot on the deck of a stunning beach, house floor to ceiling glass, panoramic views, and two little boys squealing as they chased seagulls across the sand. Ava was inside, unpacking a stack of books for her new role at the local children's art school. They'd only been here a week, but already it felt like something they'd never had before. A fresh start. No boardroom politics. No reporters hiding in bushes. No cold skyscrapers. Just the waves, the wind, and laughter that never stopped. Margaret Callahan had surprised everyone. After a tense goodbye in New York, she'd shown up on moving day dressed in white linen, armed with cookies from Brooklyn, and declaring she would be temporary backup. To everyone's shock, she meant it. She cooked, told stories, even played pirates with Ethan and Eli in the sand. The boys adored her, and for the first time, Ava didn't flinch when she was in the room. "I had the Malibu house remodeled," Margaret said one morning, casually. "The twins' rooms are upstairs. I picked their favorite colors. Miss Thelma may have advised me." Ava raised an eyebrow. "You've been texting Miss Thelma?" Margaret sipped her tea. "She's surprisingly insightful." Jack smiled from the kitchen. Everyone was changing. He'd begun laying the foundation for a new venture, a West Coast company focused on sustainable real estate and community-focused design. Smaller, slower, intentional, and near home, where he could walk the boys to school, help with science projects, hold Ava's hand on the deck at sunset. He hadn't just changed location. He'd changed his life. One evening, Ava joined him on the beach as the boys built a crooked sandcastle nearby. "I don't recognize you," she said softly. Jack smiled. "Good. That guy was an idiot." She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. "This, all of this, do you really think it can last?" Jack looked at his sons, the dogs barking in the background, Margaret helping them glue seashells to a sand bucket. "I don't just think it can," he said. "I think it's finally starting." Ava looked up at him. "Starting what?" He kissed her gently. "Our real life." The sun was melting into the Pacific, setting the Malibu sky ablaze in hues of gold and lavender. Jack Callahan sat on a beach towel, watching his sons chase the tide as it rolled in and out with rhythmic laughter. Ava sat beside him, her curls windswept, face calm, gaze distant. "You've been quiet today," Jack said, brushing a speck of sand from her arm. "I've been thinking," she replied. "About how fast life can change," Jack nodded. One airport, one moment, and everything turned. Ava smiled softly. "Do you regret it?" He turned to her. "Never. There was a time, not long ago, when Jack would have measured a day's success by closing numbers or stock percentages. Now, it was different. Success was watching Ethan conquer his fear of the ocean. Success was Eli drawing his first family portrait with 4 people in it. Success was Ava smiling, not with the mask she used to wear, but the kind that reached her soul. Jack reached into his pocket and closed his fingers around a small velvet box. He'd carried it for days. Waiting for the right moment, he stood up, brushing the sand off his pants, and extended his hand to Ava. "Walk with me?" Ava looked surprised, but took it. They walked along the shoreline barefoot, letting the surf nip at their ankles. "I've been thinking too," Jack said. Ava glanced at him. "Uh-oh," he laughed. "Not business thinking, life thinking." He paused. "When you left 5 years ago, it broke me. Not just because I lost you, but because I never got to say the most important thing." Ava stopped walking. Jack turned to face her. "I love you. I always did. But I was too busy trying to build an empire to realize I already had everything I needed in front of me." Her eyes glistened. "Jack, He dropped to one knee, pulling out the ring. Simple. Timeless.
Like her. Ava gasped, covering her mouth. I'm not asking for perfect, Jack said.
I'm asking for real. For messy mornings and bedtime chaos and dance parties in the kitchen. I'm asking to build the kind of life we never thought we deserved. He looked up at her, heart in his throat. Ava Carter, will you marry me and let me be your partner in everything from here on out? She stared at him, stunned. Then she laughed through her tears. You sure you want to marry the girl who once stormed out of your penthouse barefoot at 2 a.m.? I want to marry the girl who raised our boys with strength, grace, and no help. She nodded slowly, then knelt to his level. Yes, she whispered. Yes, 1,000 times yes. Their kiss was met with cheers, 2 tiny ones from behind a dune. Ethan and Eli stood clapping. Did you do it, Daddy? Ethan shouted. Did you do the thing? Jack looked at Ava, grinning. I did the thing. The twins ran to them, and Ava pulled them all into one giant, sandy, breathless hug. There on the beach, with salt in their hair and love in their bones, something unspoken happened. A family was reborn, no longer fractured. No longer hiding, just together. Finally. And forever. The morning began like any other. Ava was in the kitchen, humming softly as she flipped pancakes shaped like dinosaurs, Eli's latest obsession. Ethan sat at the table, coloring a picture of the wedding he kept asking about. Jack, freshly showered and in weekend jeans, had just poured coffee when Sarah called. He answered on speaker, still smiling. Sarah, it's Saturday. You're supposed to be surfing. Her voice was tight. Turn on Channel 5. Now. Jack reached for the remote. Ava looked up, concerned. A breaking news banner ran across the screen. Exclusive. Who is Ava Carter? The secret past of Jack Callahan's bride-to-be. A shaky cell phone video began playing. Grainy, but unmistakably her. A younger Ava wearing hospital scrubs, yelling at a man in a lab coat. Security guards rushing in. The words, "You're hiding patient deaths," clearly audible. Ava's breath caught. Her hand trembled as she lowered the spatula. Who haven't seen this in years? Jack muted the TV. What is this? She swallowed. It was 5 years ago. I was working at a private rehab center. Kids from wealthy families. One died an overdose. I tried to report the negligence. They buried it. And this video? Someone leaked it to discredit me. I became the emotional nurse, the unstable whistleblower. They fired me. No one would hire me after that. I took jobs under different names, started over in Brooklyn. Jack's jaw clenched. Who had access to this? Ava shook her head. Only the facility. And Charles Whitmore. His nephew was a patient there. That boy, he was the one who died. Jack's expression darkened. Charles buried a scandal to protect his family, and now he's digging up mine. Later that day, a news truck parked across from the beach house. Drones buzzed overhead. Tabloids ran headlines like, Callahan's fiancé accused of mental breakdown. Twins born in secret questions raised about custody. Jack slammed his laptop shut. This isn't journalism, it's warfare, Sarah texted again. Whitmore's PR team is behind the leak. They want to scare the board. Paint you as reckless, her as dangerous. Ava sat on the couch, pale, silent. She looked up at Jack. Maybe I should go away for a while. Take the boys. Let this pass. Jack knelt in front of her. No, you're not running. Not again. We built this life, you built this life, and we're not letting him take it. A small voice spoke from the hallway. Mommy? Ethan stood there, holding his drawing. Why is there a scary van outside? Jack stood up. Come here, buddy. He lifted Ethan into his arms and looked to Ava. We're done hiding. The next morning, Jack stood behind a podium in a small press room in downtown LA. Ava stood beside him, holding his hand. Margaret watched from the side. The boys, thank God, were with Miss Thelma at the park. Jack looked into the sea of cameras. "Let's be clear," he said.
Yes, my fiancée was caught on video yelling at a former employer. Why? Because a child died under their care.
Because she refused to stay silent. He paused. And I'm proud of her for it. Reporters scribbled furiously. She didn't run from her past.
She survived it. She raised 2 beautiful sons on her own. She built a life without money, privilege, or protection. She is the strongest woman I know, and she is the mother of my children. He looked at Ava. She nodded, tears in her eyes. Jack faced the cameras again. Charles Whitmore wants you to believe that love is weakness, that fathers can't lead and raise children, that women who speak up should be silenced. We believe the opposite, and we're not going anywhere. A hush fell over the room, and in that silence something shifted. From scandal to strength. Back at the beach house that night, Ava curled into Jack's chest. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes," Jack whispered.
"I did." She tilted her head. "Why?" He smiled. "Because this time I choose us loudly." Outside, the ocean kept its rhythm.
Steady, defiant, just like them. The sun filtered through the eucalyptus trees, casting soft gold across the backyard of their Malibu home. There were no marble halls, no chandeliers, no guest list of 300, just 20 chairs. A hand-built wooden arch wrapped in wildflowers, and 2 little boys in bow ties chasing butterflies between the rows. It was exactly what Ava had imagined, simple, sacred, and surrounded by the people who mattered most. Jack adjusted his cufflinks nervously as Margaret fussed over his collar. "You've closed billion-dollar deals," she teased, smoothing his lapel. "You'd think this would be easier." Jack smiled, breath tight.
It's different when the deal is your life. Margaret paused, eyes softening. "She's the best one you've ever made." Just then, Ethan peeked in. "Dad, is it time?"
"I've been practicing my ring walk. It's very serious." Jack grinned. "Let's see it." Ethan marched in place dramatically, chest puffed out like a soldier. Margaret clapped.
10 out of 10, Jack said. "You ready to be my best man?" Ethan nodded solemnly. "And Eli's your other best man." "Of course," Jack said.
"It's a team job." Out back, Ava stood barefoot in her dress cream silk. No train, no veil, just wind in her curls and a quiet smile. Miss Thelma, holding a small bouquet, dabbed at her eyes. "You nervous, honey?" she asked.
Ava shook her head. "No, not anymore."
"It feels like we're finishing a sentence we started a long time ago." Miss Thelma chuckled. "Then let's put a period on it, nice and proud." The ceremony began with the boys leading the way. Eli held the rings, but dropped them halfway down the aisle. Ethan dove to retrieve them, and the crowd made of friends, neighbors, and a few surprised former board members burst into laughter. Jack stood under the arch, eyes locked on Ava as she walked toward him. No music. Just the ocean breeze and the sound of his own heart pounding. When she reached him, he whispered, "You look like forever." She squeezed his hand. "You look like home." The officiant smiled. "Jack, Ava, you've both taken long, winding roads to this moment, but you've arrived, not alone, but with each other, and with 2 small miracles between you." Eli tugged at his bow tie, grinning. "Today," the officiant continued, "you aren't just becoming husband and wife. You're becoming a family officially, publicly, joyfully." Jack and Ava turned to the boys. Jack knelt. "Ethan, Eli, I promise to always protect you, listen to you, and love you more than anything in the world." Ava followed. "We promise to be your home, your team, your biggest fans." The boys each gave a high five in return. When Jack slipped the ring onto Ava's finger, his hand trembled. "For every day I missed," he said softly, "I give you forever." Ava's voice wavered, but her eyes never left his. "For every moment we thought was lost, we just made it back." "You may kiss the bride," the officiant said. They did. The crowd cheered. Margaret cried. The twins launched fistfuls of flower petals into the air like confetti. It wasn't perfect. It was better. That night, the backyard lit up with string lights and laughter. There was no first dance, just the four of them spinning barefoot in the grass to Ethan's favorite playlist. The cake was crooked, the speeches were short, but the joy was endless. Later, as the guests faded into the night, Jack and Ava stood alone beneath the stars. "Married," he said, almost in disbelief. "Legally, emotionally, spiritually." "And finally," she replied, leaning into him. He wrapped his arms around her waist. "How's it feel, Mrs. Callahan?" She smiled. "Like we're just getting started." And in the quiet of the Malibu night, with the ocean whispering nearby and two small boys snoring inside, that beginning felt more sacred than any wedding bell. It felt like everything. 3 weeks after the wedding, Ava received an envelope she hadn't expected. No return address, thick paper, her name written in bold. She opened it slowly, heart already uneasy. Inside was a legal summons. Reynolds Medical Foundation versus Ava Carter. Defamation. Breach of NDA. Emotional distress. They were suing her for speaking the truth 5 years ago. Jack was pacing by the window when she told him, "This is Whitmore again. He's pulling strings through his family's foundation. They want to bury you." "Bury us." "No," Ava said quietly, her eyes sharper than he'd ever seen them. "They want to scare me. But I'm not that girl anymore." He stopped pacing. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying, it's my turn." Ava didn't sleep that night. Instead, she sat at the kitchen table, combing through every email she'd saved, every document she'd archived under a fake name, every note from the boy's mother who had begged her, "Please, don't let them get away with this." And by dawn, she had a plan. Margaret came down the stairs in her robe and gasped softly when she saw Ava still awake. "Are you all right?" "I'm going to testify," Ava said. "Not just in my defense, in theirs." For every family they silenced, Margaret sat beside her. "That's brave." "No," Ava said, voice steady. "It's overdue." The trial was quiet at first, low profile, behind closed doors, until Ava walked into the courtroom with her head held high, and every camera in LA followed. Her old employer's attorneys tried to paint her as unstable, vengeful, emotionally compromised. They questioned her parenting, her relationship with Jack, even why she had twins and never told the father. But Ava never flinched, and then she took the stand. "I was 26. I didn't have power or a platform. I just had a conscience," she said. "A child died. A mother begged for the truth. And when I tried to speak up, they erased me." Her voice didn't crack. Her hands didn't shake. "They didn't ruin my life. They revealed who I really was." And then she pulled out a file, copies of charts, names redacted, emails she'd saved with timestamps, warnings ignored, safety procedures falsified. One juror nodded, another looked shaken. The judge asked for a recess. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded Jack as he waited with Ethan and Eli. "What do you want the public to understand, Mr. Callahan?" He looked down at his sons, then at the cameras. "That truth matters. That courage can look like a woman standing alone in a courtroom, or a mother choosing justice over silence." Inside, Ava emerged, shoulders square, eyes clear. She walked straight into Jack's arms. The boys hugged her legs. "I told them everything," she whispered. Jack smiled. "I know. I watched." 2 weeks later, the case was dropped. An anonymous whistleblower from inside the foundation confirmed Ava's testimony. The board launched an internal investigation. Several top executives resigned. And Ava? She was offered a seat on the oversight committee for the California Patient Ethics Board. She politely declined.
"I've got enough on my plate," she said, holding Ethan's sticky fingers as he offered her a gummy worm, "but I'll always speak when it counts." That night, on the same beach where she once walked away from everything, Ava stood watching her sons chase the waves. Jack came up behind her, arms circling her waist. "You saved more than just us today," he murmured. She turned to him. "I finally believe I deserve this. All of this." "You always did," he said. "Now the world knows it too." The ocean roared gently in agreement. And as stars began to peek through the dusk, the woman who had once been silenced stood tall beside the man who once feared fatherhood, surrounded by laughter, love, and the kind of peace that comes only when the storm has passed. The beach house smelled like pancakes, wet dogs, and lavender shampoo. Which is to say, it smelled like home. Jack stood at the kitchen island in his pajamas, pouring orange juice into 2 Avengers mugs, while Eli climbed onto a stool, narrating his dream from the night before. "And then the dolphin turned into a dragon and said, 'Don't forget your spelling words.'" Jack chuckled. "That's either a dream or a very creative guilt trip." Across the kitchen, Ava pulled a tray of muffins from the oven. She wore Jack's old college hoodie and a messy bun. Her smile met his eyes like it had every morning for the past few months, unspoken but steady. This wasn't the life either of them had planned. It was the one they chose. The one they built together. Later that morning, the family loaded into the SUV. Ethan had a school science fair. His project, How Trees Talk to Each Other, complete with tiny clay mushrooms and string mycelium webs. Jack parked the car and turned to him. "You nervous?" Ethan nodded. "What if no one gets it?" "They will," Ava said, smoothing his hair. "But even if they don't, we do." That was enough. Inside the school gym, kids buzzed around with dioramas and vinegar volcanoes. When it was Ethan's turn to present, his voice shook at first, but then he looked over to see his family watching. Eli gave a thumbs up. Jack mouthed, "You've got this." And he did. By the end, other parents clapped. A teacher wiped her eyes. Ethan won second place, but Ava said his was first in her heart. On the way home, they stopped for ice cream even though it was barely 10:30 a.m. "Because," Jack declared, "a win's a win." Eli grinned through a mouthful of chocolate swirl. "Best day ever." That night, after the boys were asleep and Margaret was upstairs watching British baking shows, Jack and Ava sat on the back deck with a blanket and 2 mugs of tea. The moon floated above the water, calm. "Certain," Jack took her hand. "Do you ever think about the version of us that never made it back?" Ava leaned into him. "All the time. What would you tell that version of yourself 5 years ago, alone in Brooklyn, carrying twins?" "Scared out of your mind." Ava stared into the night. Thought for a long moment. "I'd say, hold on. The life you think you lost is still out there, but better, because next time you'll have it on your terms." Jack kissed her temple. Then she turned to him. "And you? What would you tell the guy who let me walk away?" Jack didn't hesitate. "I'd tell him, you're gonna mess it all up, but if you're lucky, really lucky, love will give you one more shot. Don't waste it." They sat in silence, wrapped in warmth that had taken years to build. The next morning, Eli woke them both up by jumping onto their bed holding a handmade sign. Family movie night, crayon-drawn popcorn, a sketch of the couch, and a schedule. 6 o'clock p.m., pajamas. On 6:15 p.m., popcorn duty, Dad. 6:30 p.m., The Incredibles, because Mom is basically Elastigirl. Post-movie, group hug, optional but encouraged. Ava laughed so hard she had to sit down. Jack saluted. "Orders received, Commander Eli." That evening, as the 4 of them piled onto the couch blankets everywhere, Margaret snoring softly in the armchair, they didn't talk about the past. They didn't need to.
It had shaped them, yes, but it didn't define them. What did? The future. And it looked a lot like this: sticky fingers, laughter in the hall, a house full of stories, a woman who refused to be silenced, a man who learned to show up, two boys who had waited their whole lives to be seen and were now seen fully. Not as a secret, but as the center of it all, a real family, at last. And always. Life doesn't end with mistakes, it begins with courage. Sometimes the hardest roads lead us home. This story reminds us that no matter how far we drift through broken relationships, missed opportunities, or painful silence, there's always a chance to begin again. Jack wasn't a perfect man. Ava wasn't a flawless mother, but they chose to grow. They chose to fight for love, not pride. And in that, they found not just each other, but a family worth everything. For many of us who've lived long enough to know, life rarely follows a neat script. This is a powerful truth. Redemption is real. Being a father isn't about biology, it's about showing up. And healing doesn't come from time alone, it comes from truth, and from holding the hands that never let go. In a world quick to cancel, quick to judge, it's stories like this that remind us people can change. Families can be rebuilt. And second chances, when embraced with humility and love, are the most beautiful beginnings of all.